Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to go back to the question I asked you, Director Pompeo. And I went out and reviewed the response that you gave to me. And, of course, what I'm concerned about is the Sally Yates warning to the White House that Michael Flynn could be blackmailed by the Russians. And you said you didn't have any firsthand indication of it. Did you have any indication, secondhand, any sense at all that the National Security Advisor might be vulnerable to blackmail by the Russians? That is a yes or no question.
It's actually not a yes or no question, Senator. I can't answer yes or no. I regret that I'm unable to do so. You have to remember this is a counterintelligence investigation that was largely being conducted by the FBI and not by the CIA. We're a foreign intelligence organization, and I'll add only this. I was not intending to be clever by using the term firsthand. I had no secondhand or thirdhand knowledge of that conversation either.
So with respect to the CIA, were there any discussions with General Flynn at all?
With respect to what, sir? He was for a period of time the National Security Advisor.
Topics that could have put at risk the security and the well-being of the American people. I mean, I'm just finding it very hard to swallow that you all had no discussions with the National Security Advisor.
No, I spoke with the National Security Advisor. He was the National Security Advisor. He was present for the daily brief on many occasions, and we talked about all the topics we spoke to the President about.
But nothing relating to matters that could have compromised the security of the United States?
Sir, I can't recall every conversation that I had with General Flynn during that time period.
We're going to ask some more about it in closed session this afternoon. Admiral Rogers, let me ask you about a technical question that I think is particularly troubling, and that is the SS-7 question and the technology threat. Last week, the Department of Homeland Security published a lengthy study about the impact on the U.S. government of mobile phone security flaws. The report confirmed what I have been warning about for quite some time, which is the significance of cybersecurity vulnerabilities associated with the signaling system 7. The report says that the department believes, and I quote, that all U.S. carriers are vulnerable to these exploits, resulting in risks to national security, the economy, and the federal government's ability to reliably execute national security functions. These vulnerabilities can be exploited by criminals, terrorists, and nation-state actors and foreign intelligence organizations. Do you all share the concerns of the Department of Homeland Security's Department about the severity of these vulnerabilities, and what ought to be done right now to get the government and the private sector to be working together more clearly and in a coherent plan to deal with these monumental risks? These are risks that we are going to face with terrorists and hackers and threats, and I think the Federal Communications Commission has been treading water on this, and I'd like to see what you want to do to really take charge of this and deal with what is an enormous vulnerability to the security of this country.
Sure, I share the concern. It's a widely deployed technology in the mobile segment. I share the concern. The Department of Homeland Security, in their role, kind of is the lead federal agency associated with cyber and support from the federal government to the private sector as overall responsibility here. We are trying to provide at the National Security Agency our expertise to help generate insights about the nature of the vulnerability, the nature of the problem. Partnering with DHS, talking to the private sector. There's a couple specific things from a technology standpoint that we're looking at in multiple forms that the government has created, partnering with the private sector. I'm not smart, I apologize, about all of the specifics of the DHS effort. I can take that for the record if you'd like.
All right. I just want to respond before we break to Senator Cotton's comments with respect to Section 702. Mr. Director, glad to see my tax reform partner back in this role. You know, Mr. Director, that I think it's critical the American people know how many innocent, law-abiding Americans are being swept up in the program. The argument that producing an estimate of the number is in itself a violation of privacy is, I think, a far-fetched argument. It has been made for years. I and others who believe that we can have security and liberty, that they're not mutually exclusive, have always believed that this argument that you're going to be invading people's privacy doesn't add up. We have to have that number. Are we going to get it? Are we going to get it in time so we can have a debate that shows that those of us who understand there are threats coming from overseas, and we support the effort to deal with those threats as part of 702, that we are not going to have Americans' privacy rights indiscriminately swept up. We need that number. When will we get it?
Senator, as you recall, during my confirmation hearing, we had this discussion. I promised to you that I would, if confirmed, and I was, go out to NSA, meet with Admiral Rogers, try to better understand why it was so difficult to come to a specific number. I did go out to NSA. It was hosted by Admiral Rogers. We spent significant time talking about that. And I learned the complexity of reaching that number. I think the statements that had been made by Senator Cotton are very relevant statements as to that. Clearly, what I have learned is that a breach of privacy has to be made against American people, have to be made in order to determine whether or not they've breached privacy. So there is an anomaly there. There are issues of duplication. I know that we're underway in terms of setting up a time with this committee, I believe in June, as early as June, to get into that issue and to address that and talk through the complexity of why it's so difficult to say, this is specifically when we can get you the number and what the number is. So I believe we are committed to a special meeting with the committee to try to go through this particular issue. But I cannot give you a date because and number because I understand the complexity of it now and why it's so difficult for Admiral Rogers to say this specific number. Is the number.
I'm well over my time. The point really is privacy advocates and technologists say that it's possible to get the number. If they say it and the government is not saying it, something is really out of sync. You've got people who want to work with you. We must get on with this and to have a real debate about 702 that ensures that security and liberty are not mutually exclusive. We have to have that number. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator.